Purpose of today's call was to just introduce you to engineering firms. Now, what I'll do is I'll just kind of assume that you don't know anything. I know many of you do know quite a bit more. So, if I'm going over something that you already know, just understand that I'm just trying to get in at the bottom level and work my way up. Also, there's no way in just a few minutes here to cover everything. So I've intentionally tried to keep this reasonably brief and not go off on every conceivable topic. So if you have a question about something that I didn't cover, go ahead and throw it in at the end, and we'll cover it then. So just keep that in mind. So in terms of what we want to talk about, uh, four things really before we get to questions. I want to present this from the standpoint of how it's going to benefit you as an outside sales guy. You know, what are the things that we want, and then I want to work backwards and show you how the calling on engineering firms can help you get what you want. So what do we want as salespeople? Just want to identify that, and then we want to talk about what an engineering firm is. Kind of give you a sense of what these companies do, what types of engineering firms there are, and then we want to talk about the value that they need from us. What is it that they need from us? They're not a contractor, they're not an end user. What is it that they need from us that we can bring to them that will cause them in turn to help us? And then finally, we'll talk about a little bit about how to call on them. How do you identify these? How do you get names? What do you do in the meetings? That kind of thing. All right. So those are the four things that we want to try to cover in this session. So first of all, what do we want as salespeople? What is it that we want? Well, obviously, what we want are orders. We want more orders. So we want increased revenue. That's what we're all trying to do. And we want that at increased margins. That goes without saying. So let's work backwards here and see how these things can come through calling on engineering firms. So in order to increase revenue and increase margin, some of the things that would benefit us to do would be to know about more projects. If we know about more projects, we can get involved in more projects, and those can become more revenue for us. But also, when we know about more projects, then we can refer contractors into more projects. When we refer a contractor into a project, he is loyal to us in terms of the numbers that he gets, not going to beat us up over price so much. And in most situations, he's not even going to go out for another number because we put him into the deal. So if we want, more orders, higher percentage orders, then getting a position where we can refer contractors into deals is very helpful. And then speccing manufacturers. So if I can get into a project, spec a manufacturer, work it backwards and get the registration, then I'll have a price advantage when it comes time to quote something. So these three things, if I can do these three things, layer this into what I'm doing as an outside rep, then I'm going to be able to drive my revenue and my margins up. And the point of this discussion today is to show you how engineering firms can help us, calling on engineering firms can help us do that. You can help us identify additional projects, which we can then refer contractors into, and puts us in a position to spec manufacturers into projects. So let's sort of just use this as the framework for what we're going to talk about. How does this happen? How does this come about? So we know what we want here. We know what we're driving at. Let's now look at an engineering firm. What is an engineering firm? We talk about that in the context of our business and our industry. In order to understand what an engineering firm, we really need to talk about how buildings are built. This entire context of our conversation is new construction. Somebody's building a new building or they're renovating a new building. This isn't somebody rewiring inside of an existing building. We're talking about actually building a structure or renovating an entire structure. So who builds buildings? There are really three major players that come into play in this situation. First, you have your architect, right? Architect. Now, an architect is really one who's looking at what the building is going to look like, how big it's going to be, how is it going to be laid out, what's the style architecture going to be of this facility. They're working with the customer, the client, to develop the need, the look, and the layout of the facility, of the building itself, whether it's a school or a factory or a hospital. And then we have a subject of our discussion today. We have engineering firms. So an engineering firm is generally working for an architect, and their job is to focus on the systems, the structure and the systems of that building. They don't care so much how it looks. They're not really worried about how it's laid out. Those are all given to them by the architect. Now they're going to build the structure, worry about the structure of the building and the systems that go in the building, that they're safe. That's a huge thing in construction, that they function properly, they work, and they meet codes so you can get a certificate of occupancy and get in the building and do whatever it is you want to do in that building as an owner. And then underneath this, we have the general contractor, who is actually taking the architect's vision, the engineering specifications, and building the actual building. There are all kinds of different ways that these three parties work together to build a building. We're not going to talk about any of that right now, but these are just the big picture pieces. So the engineer here, let's just dive in a little bit more, a little bit closer to this engineer. There are really three types of engineering firms. Now there are actually more, but as a rule, big picture, you're going to have these three types of engineering firms on all the construction that goes on in your market in the United States. You're going to have a civil engineer. A civil engineer is really about dirt. They're grading grading the actual land, getting rid of the trees. They're dealing with getting utilities in, sewer, water, power lines. They're building roads. They're doing drainage. So if you're driving down the road and you see some bulldozer pushing over trees, then you know that there's a civil engineer that's already been working on that project. And a lot of times when you go into a trailer, a work trailer, that early in the job, the only engineering firm you're going to be able to really talk to would be civil. Civil is really not where we play, obviously, as everybody knows already. Then we have structural engineers. Structural engineers are really talking about the foundation of the building, the frame of the building, and anything that bears the load of it. They're making sure the building will stand up and carry the weight of everything that they're trying to put in that building. So structural. We don't really deal with structural. And then we got what's called an MEP. MEP, that's what you'll hear when you talk about engineering firms in commercial buildings. And that stands for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So an MEP is inside the building working on the power distribution, the power panels, the outlets, all of that. The mechanical systems, which would be the heating, ventilation, and cooling, the HVAC stuff, and the plumbing, right? So MEP, that's a term that you'll want to be familiar with. If you're working on a project, if you're working with an architect, or maybe even a GC, you might say, who's the MEP on the job? They'll know exactly what that is. Now, this is where the MEP is where we come in. This is where the systems that we care about tend to show up under the electrical, right? Not the mechanical, of course, not the plumbing, but the electrical. So let's dive in a little bit more now to these electrical engineers and find out what we need to know about them. So obviously we've got a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, we've got an MEP, and that MEP is going to have electrical engineers on staff. And those electrical engineers are going to be worried about three things: electrical power, the power distribution within the building, lighting, lights above, lights outside, whatever lighting you would have, and then the low voltage systems. Now in construction, pretty much everything that we sell at Accutag will fall under this heading of low voltage. So they won't necessarily call it data wire or BDA or whatever. They'll use those terms, but the overarching term is low voltage. So when you talk to an architect, an engineer, consultant, or a general contractor in the construction space, you want to use the term low voltage. And then if there's a specific system you want to talk about, then you name that system. But low voltage is what you want to talk about. So let's just kind of dive into what kind of low voltage systems the electrical engineer in a new construction is going to be dealing with. Now, in order to really talk about that, one of the things I need to introduce you to, if you don't already know it, is something called the master format. The master format. There, in a new construction, the specifications that talk about, from electrical, sheetrock, lighting, everything you could think of, are in a certain format. There is a number designation system for each section within that building, and it falls under what they call the master format. So here is, and again, there's a lot on this slide, but here are some examples of some of the section numbers in the master format for different things. So for example, let's look here. We've got 04. Section 04 is masonry, right? Bricks and stone. Let's see here. 22 is plumbing, right? 31 is earthwork, and so on. So when the electrical engineer is looking at low voltage, he's looking to write and develop specs for certain sections within the master format. And the two that deal with our systems are what's called Division 27, which is communications, and Division 28, which is electronic safety and security. And I'm going to dig into these a little bit more, but master format. So when you're talking, and this is true of just all people in the construction industry, you're going to be talking about divisions. What are you doing for Division 27? What are you doing for Division 28? What's in Division 27? What's in Division 28? When you get a set of specs from a general contractor, you open up the documents, you're going to look for Division 27 and Division 28. These are the places that all of our systems generally reside. So we're talking about electrical engineers. Division 27 and Division 28 are where they're going to put our stuff. The Division 27 is going to have data cabling. These are just big kind of headings of stuff that's going to be in these specs. Data cabling will be one section within that. That's going to be all your copper and fiber, any backbone cable, all the layer one data cabling will be in there. Distributed antennas, cellular DAS, if it's in the scope of work, generally goes in Division 27. Now, as you probably know, that's not always in the scope, but if it is, it'll be there. Audio visual will be in 27. And these are just broad rules. They can change it. They can do whatever they want, but this is the general way it's done. And things like paging. So, your Valcom or your Boken, that kind of stuff will be in Division 27. Now, Division 28 is where we're going to have the public safety BDA, the wireless system for first responders. Mass notification will go under 28. And access control and cameras. Those will go under 28. So the reason, just in the bigger picture, that we want to call on engineering firms is if any of this stuff is in their scope of work, meaning their design package, then they're going to be writing specs and putting stuff on prints and plans for those systems. And of course, down the line is when our contractors are going to get involved and bid those. So they're sort of dealing with this stuff upstream during the design and spec stage. That's from a broad standpoint, that's why we want to be engaged with them, because they're writing these documents. All right, so that's just a big picture of what an engineering firm is. So now let's move and let's talk for a moment about the value that they need from us. Why do they want to talk to us? How do we present ourselves to them in a way that causes them to want to take a meeting with us and interface with us and make us a part of their process? All right, the value engineering firms need from us. Now, it may be surprising to you. It's frankly surprising to me after all these years. I got into low voltage in 96. So I'm dating myself a little bit here. And at the time, Category 5 had just come out, Twisted Pair Category 5, and nobody knew anything about it. So it was brand new, and I spent a lot of time. I was with Panduit, and I went and spent a lot of time going to engineering firms, educating them on data cabling, the TIA standards, and so on. and that's nearly 30 years ago. What surprises me is that low voltage is still it was not understood well then by engineering firms and a lot of people in the construction industry, and it still isn't. As a general rule, there are exceptions. Most engineering firms, most electrical engineers don't know very much about low voltage. It's not that they're not intelligent, they're super smart. Um, but for whatever reason, low voltage still is kind of a gray area. It may have to do with the fact that low voltage is a smaller part of the total construction project. It's just, if you've got a $40 million new construction, you might have, $5 to $8 million in electrical. So electrical is really, really important in the scheme of the cost of the building, but low voltage still isn't. So that may be one of the reasons. Whatever the case, they just don't seem to know a ton about it. So our value to them in the broadest sense possible is what we do know about low voltage. So those division in 27 and 28 items that we just talked about, data cabling, mass notification, security, access control, DAS, BDA, those are areas that they know of, but they don't know a whole lot of specifics. Now, I will say, just pause here and say that with engineering firms, depending on the size of the company, depending on where it is, depending on what they're trying to do, you're going to have everything from companies, engineering firms that know almost nothing, to those who have pretty much divisions within themselves that do low voltage consulting. So I'm not trying to lump anybody into the box of not knowing a lot. You're going to have some that almost act more like low voltage consultancy firms. But my experience is most electrical engineering firms don't know a lot about low voltage, and that opens up a really important door for us. So let's talk about what they need in this area of low voltage, and then what we can provide. And this is where we start to get to why we're valuable and how we need to be talking to them and presenting ourselves, because we don't present ourselves as a distributor with 35 stocking locations and all the big manufacturers. That's an important part of our value, but not to these kinds of people. They're glad to know that you do that, but that's not why they want to talk to you. So let's look at what they need, and then talk about what we can provide that's of value. All right, so the first thing they're going to need when low voltage is in their scope of work, as I said before, I think low voltage, all these low voltage systems aren't always included in their scope. Okay, but when they are, they don't really know much about them. So they need someone that they trust, who's a subject matter expert, knows what they're talking about, to help them with design and writing of the low voltage specs for whatever system they have, in their scope of work. So they may, you're over talking to an engineer and he says, so, yeah, this project, I don't have low voltage in it for me, but this project I've got cameras in. And he's like, and you might ask something like, well, do you need any help with the design of that? Do you have all the information that you need? And he's like, well, not really. All right, that's an open door. He's basically saying, I need somebody to help me figure out what I need to do. How do I write the specs? What do I, what do I design in, and how do I design it? All right, and then in that case, what do? We know low voltage. We know these systems. So then our value to him in that case is that we can help him with design, and then we can help him write some specs. Now, in just a moment, I'll talk to you about how the ways who you want to leverage to get that done. But from a big picture standpoint, this is the value that we can provide in that case. Secondly, solve low voltage problems related to their projects. I had an engineer that I've been calling on for about a year, and I've been able to establish myself and Accu-Tech as subject matter expert. We know what we're talking about. You can trust us. And so he calls me and he says, look, I've got a BDA I've got to put in an existing building. All I've got is a small janitor's closet. He said, I don't know, can I fit it in there? Okay, so he's got a low voltage problem. And so I asked him what the dimensions are. We talked a little bit about what kinds of systems he's going to be using. I jumped online. I looked up the size of Kumba, the size of Westel battery backups, looked at the kind of doors they had, if they came off or if they swung open. And together we just kind of I helped him figure out what he needed, sent him some information, and solve the problem for him. So low voltage problem solving. It's a big deal when it comes up because they don't know. He didn't even know where to start looking for something like that, but he trusted me. So he called me, and I'll talk to you about how we're going to turn that kind of a conversation into orders here in just a minute. But then finally, one of the things that these are smart technical people. They're interacting with owners, they're interacting with architects, they're interacting with the owners' IT teams and technical teams. But what they don't really know much about the systems, so they don't like that. They want to be able to understand these systems a little bit better and be able to interact with their clients better on low voltage. But they don't know where to start with that. So what we can do, and this is something that I've had a lot of success with here in my market, is 101 low voltage type trainings. So things like, fiber optics 101, BDA 101, access control 101. These are 45-minute lunch and learn type trainings that they eat up. They love it. And those become the basis for them learning to trust you and then call you because you're the subject matter expert. So these are really the three things that we can do that provide value to engineering firms and cause them to want to talk to us. And as you can see, they're not really logistics in nature. They're not about warehouses and stocking locations. They're about what we know. We're almost a little bit of a mini consultant. All right. So what do we get in return? You say, okay, Wes, we're spending this time. I did a luncheon with them. I did a 101 on something. I helped them solve a problem. I wrote a little bit of a spec. How does that help me? Let's go back to what we talked about earlier about the things that we want to get to help us get more orders at higher margin. All right. So number one, we know about projects. This is something that as you start to call on these kind of customers, clients, you're going to find out that there's a whole lot of projects that never make it to Dodge or the medical construction database or these others. Not to say that those aren't good, and they have a lot in them, but there are going to be a lot of projects that never touch those databases. And so other people don't know about them. So when the guy calls me and says, I need to figure out how to get this Kumba battery backup into this little closet, well, he's immediately telling me about a project that I didn't know anything about. And so then I get the information on that project. I find out when it's bidding. And again, I'll mention some more about that later. And then I get my contractors involved in that project, but I didn't even know about it until the guy called me to get my help. Okay. So whenever you're with these kind of firms, we'll talk about questions to ask them in a minute, but you're always asking, what low voltage projects do you have that I can help you with? Or what projects do you have coming out, in the next 30 to 60 days? And then you're taking that information and then you're referring in, getting your contractors, the guys that like you, involved. All right. So we know more projects when we're doing this. We're in a position to refer contractors, and then we can specify manufacturers. There's a lot that could be said about that piece of it. I will just say this: you can't always do that. But what you can do is when someone comes to you with something, you can try to get your guy added. If you wanted to add Westel instead of maybe they had Honeywell's BDA on there, then you're in a position to say, hey, would you mind adding Kumba so we can quote Kumba, all right, or whatever. So you can add those manufacturers in as the opportunities come up. Then you try to get a registration and so on. All right. So these are the things that come out of these kinds of discussions and this kind of a strategy to call on these guys. All right. So finally, how do we call on them? So we talked about what we want out of things, how we're going to build more revenue and higher margins. We talked about what an engineering firm is and our value to that engineering firm. Now let's talk about the process of starting to engage with these guys. All right, so which firms to target? You say, Wes, I don't have any idea who to look for. I don't know who to talk to in my market. All right. What you want to look for are firms that are doing low voltage now, right? Or the ones that are showing up on big projects. You just start to keep your eyes open for who's showing up. You say, well, how do I find those? All right. Three great places to find those. First, the construction databases. When you're searching through medical construction or Dodge, when you get closer to the construction timeline, you've got planning, and then you've got bidding, and you've got all that stuff. When you find those projects that are closer to actually bidding, they will list engineering firms in there, and a lot of times they'll have a contact. So construction databases are a good place to start to identify the firms that are working in your market. But the other two places that are great, and I've had help from both of these, are to ask your manufacturers and ask your contractors. Who do you guys see on your jobs? Who's doing the engineering, the electrical engineering for the projects that you're running into? And they will know, because a lot of times they have to do their submittals when they win a job. When a contractor wins a job on a particular project, he has to submit what he's going to put in, some documents for review and approval before he can put anything in. Those go to the electrical engineer as a rule. Unless there's a consultant on the job, they're going to go to the electrical engineer. So he's going to know those, and he's going to know their names and emails and things like that. So you can find these guys through your partners, essentially. And then how do you find contacts? Already kind of indicated that you're going to find names a lot of times in the databases. Another great place is if, let's say that one of your contractors says, Stantec. Stantec does a lot of stuff around here. Well, who does it over there? I don't really know who does it, but I know they show up a lot. Well, a lot of times you can go to the website of the firm, and they will actually list the people that work there and what they do. So you can identify somebody from the website and then try to get with them. Your manufacturers and contractors, when they tell you about someone, a lot of times they'll know someone. CommScope shared an important one with me when I first got started doing this about a year ago in this office. Ask them for names and contacts. LinkedIn is good. And then if you guys aren't already a member, I want to just throw in a plug for AMFP. Not sure if you guys have heard of it. You probably heard it from the healthcare team. But AMFP is an association of medical facility people. It's anybody who's involved in building a medical office building or healthcare facility. This is a nationwide association, and they have chapters all over the country. And they have one for South Carolina that I got involved with a little less than a year ago. And it has been one of the best, absolutely one of the best associations I've ever been a part of for meeting people in the construction industry. GCs, which I know we want to call on as well, engineering firms, architects, owners. I just highly recommend you get involved with them. I've met a lot of people through that. It's just tremendous. So you can look it up, AMFP. I think it's .org, and you can join it. I think it's $200 a year or whatever, and start to get involved. But that's where you can find some contacts to get yourself started. In terms of getting the meeting, email or telephone. Obviously, a lot of these guys won't take a phone call, so you're going to have to do an email. But my recommendations here are, when you're reaching out to them, you have to focus on that knowledge value that we talked about. You have to say things like, we assist in the design and spec of low voltage. We solve problems, low voltage problems for engineering firms. We can provide 101 type low voltage training for your staff. That's the kind of stuff that you want to talk about in your phone call or your email. You can tell them, I usually say that I work for a value added technology supplier. That's the phrase I use. And then I start talking about our value and I ask for a meeting. Now, like general contractors and architects, engineering firms will usually have someone in their office that will do lunch and learn coordination, office manager or someone. But one of the things that you can ask for is you can say, is there someone in your office that coordinates lunch and learns for companies like mine? And then you get in touch with them and you schedule. A lot of times your introductory meeting or your training or whatever is going to be scheduled through that lunch and learn process. Well, that's an easy way to get in the door because that's part of their culture. Now, in terms of presentations, you're like, Wes, I don't know what am I going to present? I don't have anything. You guys probably got a Dropbox link from me a few weeks ago. I'll resend it to you again. You can use my stuff, change it however you want. Credit's not necessary. Just use it. Make it into whatever you want it to be. You say, well, Wes, I got that first introductory meeting. Now how do I get back in the door? What's my next step? All right. Repeat meetings. Here are some ideas. I have a tremendous amount of luck with trainings. So I will schedule with that person, whoever that person is doing the schedule. I'll come around every quarter or every 4 months and I'll reach out and I'll get back in the door doing some kind of other training. That puts me in front of, 5, 10 engineers. I talk about something else. I ask about projects. It gives me a chance to really get to know them. All right. Vendor introductions and training. You get your vendors in there. Now, my recommendation to you is you try to establish yourself and Accu-Tech as the center of the value proposition, not just the vendors. If you bring in vendors all the time and you don't show yourself and your company having value, then they're going to start to think that your only value is that you bring people by, not that you necessarily know anything when they have a problem. So my recommendation to you is that you try to start off with you and Accu-Tech, maybe even Accu-Tech staff, and then build off of that. But vendor introductions and having a vendor do a training is another way. And then relationship building. Start to look at these guys just like you would a contractor. So your lunches, happy hours, events, they're just guys. I know it may seem a little intimidating because they're an engineer or whatever, but I'm telling you, they're just like us. Play golf with them, take them to lunch, get to know them. Just work. Whoever seems to be your good buddy when you go in, whoever's most interested in talking to you, whoever's most open, just say, hey, you want to go to lunch? Let's go to lunch. Let's, love to get to know you better. That kind of thing. Now, we just got one slide left after this, guy. So we're wrapping this up. But when you're in your meeting, whether it's an introductory meeting or it's that follow-up meeting, or even if it's a luncheon, you want to be asking some questions that drive to your reason for doing all of this, which we talked about earlier. So let me give you 3 questions that you want to try and ask during these meetings or at the end of these meetings to help yourself. Number 1, do you have any projects with low voltage scope or with low voltage problems I can help you with? This is where you're trying to get them to, pull them out. What can I help you with? Ask them that. I almost always have somebody come up after the fact or say, let me talk to you in a minute. I've got a pharmacy I'm working on or whatever. And you want to use those when they have low voltage scope, which means they're writing the specs themselves. But even if they don't write the specs, they still know about the project. Okay, so we'll talk about that one in a second. You want to try, or if they've got a problem, you want to use that as an opportunity to try and spec something. Okay, if the door is open, add them to the list or say, hey, the list you've got of manufacturers is kind of outdated. Can I provide you an updated list? Try to get something in writing on that project. Whatever you do, make sure you get the name of the project, when it's bidding, and a GC if there's a GC already on it. Why do you need to know that? Because you want to refer your contractor in. And if you don't know those three things, you're going to have a very difficult time getting them involved. So you want to ask those things. And then refer. So try to do spec work if you can. Get project information, and then refer your low voltage guy into it. Get your contractor involved in whatever project that is. All right, that's first question. Second question is, what projects do you have coming out to bid? As I mentioned earlier, not all the projects that an engineering firm is going to be working on will they have low voltage scope in it. A lot of times the owner will handle it, or there'll be a consultant involved, which of course you want to ask about that as well if that's the case. So they're not necessarily writing anything, so you can't get anything spec'd on certain projects. But all of the projects that they're working on have low voltage in them from someone. You know, they're not going to put in a whole building without any low voltage in it. So you want to find out, just like you did in the prior question, you want to find out, okay, you're not doing scope on that, but when is it bidding? What is the name of the project? And is there a GC involved yet? Then you can refer your guys in. And then finally, what low voltage systems would you like to learn more about? And what do you guys want to know more about? Get them to tell you, and then that becomes the one you schedule. And you even say, well, what I'll do is I'll work with your scheduler, and I'll try to get something scheduled here in the next quarter to help you guys get up to speed on that. All right. So you're asking for training opportunities. All right, now final slide here. I can imagine when we're used to calling on contractors, you're asking yourself, man, can I actually stand in front of an engineering firm and give a 101 on cabling? Or, I'm a little afraid to have this guy email me and ask me if I can help him on this spec because I'm not really sure what, I don't know if I can do that. I mean, do I actually have the capability to do that? So can I do this? Let me help you try to get past that fear just here for a moment. All right, so let's think about the things that we're offering to do. As we said before, we're design and spec assistance, low voltage problem solving, and training. All right, so how do you put yourself in a position where you can begin to grow into being able to do these? You're not necessarily going to be able to do them, today, but you want to move in that direction. So here's what you're going to need to do if you're going to be able to do this kind of work. All right. You have to learn more. You have to learn more. You simply cannot count on everybody else to know stuff for you. You're going to bring in subject matter experts when you need them, but you need to become the value yourself. You need to know stuff. And the reason you do is because if you don't, you're not going to make the company look like it does. That person's going to go, well, he's saying he knows that they're good, but he doesn't know anything. So there's really no point in calling him. All right. Now, Accutech's got so much great about its culture, but one of our great weaknesses is training. We pretty much don't teach anybody how to do anything. So you're going to have to do this on your own. You need to learn these technologies from your vendors and not just the products. You don't want to just have Corning tell you everything there is to know about a Unicam, but technologies, BDAs, mass notification. Get them on the line, schedule calls with them, and get them to teach you about the system itself. That is one of the ways that I'm learning a lot right now. And then leverage AI. I used AI for this presentation today in a couple of spots. Earlier on, when I had that table with all the divisions from the master's format, I did that in ChatGPT. I said, pull up the master spec format, give me the titles, and put it in a table. Just sit and type and ask ChatGPT questions, and it will teach you things about these technologies. And then get support from the team that you have around you. All right. We have really good overlay teams, AV, security, access control, wireless. Leverage these guys to teach you, but leverage them, bring them in to do that 101 training. Or when you have somebody reach out to you about a wireless, a BDA question, get pull in your team member to help you get that figured out. You don't have to do all of this yourself. Your manufacturers can help with that, and your contractors as well. I lean a lot on my contractor partners to help me learn stuff and then help me do things that I need to do. And then finally, this is all I've got for you in terms of content. Um, you need to take the risk. Okay, you've got to just step out there, guys. I get nervous. First time I started doing this stuff, I'm thinking, oh man, I do not know enough to do this. But I'm not going to be afraid of it. I'm going to do it anyway. And then I'm going to learn as I go. And after about a year, I don't get too scared anymore. I know a lot more and I've seen the success of it.